in who have not yet made it to state prison get back on track in their lives, and subsequently, of course, preempt any more crime in our communities. That would be a significant accomplishment all around. So that's exactly what our bill does. It directs funds in a thoughtful fashion to probation departments that can document that they are helping their probationers succeed in their probationary period and can document that there is a lower crime rate in their communities as a result. And we would be sharing some of the cost savings that we would experience here at the state because we would have lowered our prison population and then, of course, continue to fund as they can continue to perform. This is not realignment, but this is a sharing of savings. And so Senator Benoit and I, who, of course, are chair and vice chair of our Public Safety Committee on the Senate side, have joined forces to move forward SB 678, and also very pleased that we have a formidable sponsor and a great partner in the chief probation officers. And with that, I'll pass the microphone to my joint author.
Welcome, Senator.
Thank you. And Senator, thank you. And I am pleased to be here as a co-author, joint author of this important piece of legislation. Adult probation is a ticking time bomb with over 270,000 convicted felons on probation who receive limited or no supervision. And I think this bill is an important step in the right direction. It's not realignment, where counties receive state funding to supervise felons no longer eligible for commitment in state prison. It is not a subsidy for counties. Pardon me. The funding for this proposal would come from savings generated, and necessarily the savings precede the funding. And that would be shared with, not entirely, but shared with the counties. It's a win-win for public safety. I'm pleased to join the chief probation officers and Senator Lendo in sponsoring this very important piece of legislation. And we have a number of witnesses who would like to testify in support of the legislation.
Very well. Witnesses in support.
Karen Pank on behalf of both the California State Sheriff's Association, who's in support of the bill, but I'm also the executive director of the Chief Probation Officers of California, the sponsors of the bill. And I'd like to yield my time to our legislative chair and past president, Chief Jerry Powers of Stanislaus.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to present to you this morning. I'd like to thank Senators Leno and Benoit for co-sponsoring this bill. Or co-authoring the bill, excuse me. This is always difficult following two speakers because I've already crossed off about three things that I was going to say because they've already said it. I actually wrote down win, 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 and Senator Leno said that about the third sentence in, so that's out.
This was in. You repeated it successfully.
Let me start by essentially saying what this bill is not. This is not a change to sentencing laws. It is not a proposal for a sentencing commission. It's not early release of offenders from our state prison system. It's not parole reform. And it certainly isn't realignment. All of those are, as you know, very difficult issues here in Sacramento. Essentially, what this bill is, and I describe it as being decades in the making. This bill is a response to the predicament that the state prison system is in. I testified a month or so before you about the three-judge panel and the prospect of releasing prisoners. And essentially, in a nutshell, what this bill does, the philosophy is let's not release them out the back door. Let's prevent them from getting to the front door so that we don't have to deal with overcrowded conditions in our state prison system. Let's provide some front-end services for individuals who are already in our communities. We're not bringing a new population into our communities. We're going to deal better with the population that's already there. It's good for public safety. When we treat them in the community and we can keep them in our community safely, certainly the community wins, the family members win, the neighbors win, and public safety wins. I think that at the end of the day, what we see in this formula that is being proposed in the legislation is that the taxpayers are going to get a much better bang for their buck. They're going to be safer at the end of this. And quite frankly, our state prisoners will benefit in that they will be in less crowded facilities. We will get better outcomes with our local population, because we will use evidence-based programs to provide the services that are sorely needed and, quite frankly, that have not been provided for decades in our local corrections system. So with that, I will just ask for your support of this bill and assure you that you've got every chief probation officer in this state that is chomping at the bit to get this thing started and start reforming our local corrections system. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Good morning, committee chair and members of the committee. My name is Jim Frayne. I'm here representing the California Coalition of Probation Organizations, which is the line officers, the deputy sheriffs of Sacramento, Orange County, Anaheim Police Association, and the Fraternal Order of Police Sacramento chapter. We all know the tremendous budget crisis. The Legislative Analyst's Office and the governor are going to wholesale and propose releasing thousands of more prisoners into the communities. However, the problem with that is there's no funding for local police jails. The court now has an order of 22 jails in California for overcrowding. So releasing those prisoners is going to exacerbate the situation locally with public safety. This program, as it says, 1, 2, 3, win, win, win. It costs nothing. California, unfortunately, is the 49th state in the United States with a 70% recidivism rate. That says failure. This is a program with risk management, performance-based, and what it would do, put the R back in rehabilitation. Probation has already proven it pays dividends for every dollar put into probation. And any person that doesn't go back to state prison saves the state $49,000. There's no way to lose on this. It's not a gamble. We urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. June Clark with the Judicial Council in support of this bill. The judicial branch sees the probation departments as working in partnership with the court system, and last fall we held the Summit of Judicial Leaders, and the primary topic of discussion was how to improve sentencing outcomes. The use of evidence-based supervision practices is one of the key components of that, and we are in support of this bill for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Gray on behalf of Taxpayers for Improving Public Safety, as well as Victims Foundation, representing a number of victims of violent crime. When people are successful on parole, we have a reduction in the creation of victims, and we thankfully support this bill and appreciate Mr. Leno's efforts. Thank you, and Mr. Benoit's efforts.
Thank you. Next.
Good morning, Chair and members. Rosemary Lamb with the California State Association of Counties. We are also in support of this measure for the reasons previously stated, and would just like to thank the authors for their work in bringing resources into the front end of the adult criminal justice system. Thank you.
Next.
Good morning, Karen Lang with the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors in support. Thank you.
Good morning, Dawn Kepke on behalf of Crime Victims United of California in support. Thank you.
Ignacio Hernandez on behalf of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice and also on behalf of the California Youth Build Coalition in support of the bill.
Very well. I think you've got all the witnesses. Is there anybody opposed? Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Amiano.
Yes, through the chair, just a clarification. Will this supplant the courtesy supervision process that's now in place?
I think this will augment whatever we're doing currently and in a significant fashion.
Thank you.
And just clarification, you have some urgency amendments that also will be part of the motion, if that's agreeable to the maker in the second.
Yes, we are amending with an urgency clause, and as we're doing so, would be very happy to add any co-authors if there are any around. Great, thank you.
Very well, as would the chair.
Thank you, sir.
Any other members, comments? Very well. Mr. Vice Chair.
Add us all on, Mr. Leno. Commend your efforts and work. I know it takes a long time to put all this stuff together, come up with a system, especially to get everybody on board with that system. So we're going to understand there's a lot of reporting requirements there. The evidence-based practices is always a good choice to start off with, to know it's going to work. And it's different than what happened with the Probation Subsidy Act, during the 70s, which was not a success. And so thank you for looking backwards, and we're interested to see how these things go forward and hopefully find a new system for it. So definitely do support it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hagman. I know you have a lot of experience in this, so we're happy to have your support.
Any additional comments or questions? Hearing none, there was a motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Arambula?
Aye.
Arambula, aye. Hagman? Aye. Hagman, aye. Amiano? Aye. Amiano, aye. Furutani? Aye. Furutani, aye. Gilmore? Aye. Gilmore, aye. Hill? Aye. Hill, aye. Ma? Ma, aye. The bill's out.
Very well. Congratulations to both of you, Senators. Senator Benoit, I understand you have several other bills that we will now take up. And just as a matter of housekeeping, we have approved the consent calendar, and there are two items that are off calendar. Item 7, Senator Pavley, SB 197, and item 9, SB 282 by Senator Wright. Those will be have been taken off calendar for today. Senator Benoit, you'd like to present, I understand, on SB 169. Item number 6.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members, Senate Bill 169 will allow the head of a local, state, or state agency as defined by Penal Code Section 830.1 and 830.2 that employs peace officers to issue various honorary insignia that clearly state that the person's position as an honorary peace officer from that agency. This bill is narrowly drafted as a clarification in response to an Attorney General's opinion that called this long-standing honor and practice into question. Only honorably retired, full-time sworn peace officers will be eligible to receive the honorary insignia designated under this bill. The bill passed unanimously out of the Senate Public Safety Committee and off the floor of the State Senate. I can tell you, as a retired member of the California Highway Patrol and even as a commander of the patrol, it was an honor and a privilege to present to many officers who had dedicated a huge portion of their lives to law enforcement this token of appreciation that they wore on their chest every day that they were on the beat. It is a badge that has a designation on it that they are now retired, but it goes along with their issued peace officer powers, retired peace officer powers, which includes the right to carry a firearm. This has been historic practice for years. This simply restores a very honorable practice that was called into question by an Attorney General's opinion, I think not intentionally. With that, I have support from a number of folks, including the sheriffs of San Bernardino County. I'd be pleased if you would speak at this point.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Lieutenant Barbara Ferguson, representing San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, and I'm here to testify on the need for having a law in place, especially to revoke an honorary badge that has been issued whenever there's an event of misuse with a badge. So we're in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional witnesses in support of the bill? Please come forward.
Oh, thank you. Karen Pank on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association in support.
Additional witnesses in support? Any in opposition? Any questions or comments by committee members?
Through the chair.
Yes, Mr. Amiano.
Yes, Senator, or I'm just wondering if there's any information about the extent of counterfeiting of badges and identification.
You know, badges are a piece of metal that can be purchased from a number of sources over the internet, stores. You can walk into any antique store and buy all sorts of different types of badges.
I used to get them from cereal boxes.
Sure. There's clearly a lot of avenues for people, and this bill does nothing to either try to address that problem or become part of that problem. This is strictly for the person who has a piece of metal that's become very important to him because of the dedication service he's provided over many decades, typically. So I believe that those issues are real, but they're not related to the cause or effect of this bill.
Thank you very much.
Member Ma, you had a question or comment?
I do. One of the arguments in opposition is that this bill gives no avenue of appeal for abuse. Similar to Assembly Member Amiano, I'm working on a handicap placard bill, and there's a lot of abuse. There's fake ones out there. People are buying them on the internet, for example, on Craigslist, and we're trying to curb that practice and make sure that people don't do that. And so, again, similar, like, why didn't you put any sort of ways so that people wouldn't abuse it, or some sort of penalty if people were caught, having these counterfeit
Thank you.
badges?
Thank you, Senator Mama. As I explained to Senator Leno, who had some serious concerns at the beginning of this bill, and we had an evening chat in his office, and I showed him my peace officer's identification, retired peace officer, which is very impressive looking and includes on it the fact that I can carry a gun, for a concealed weapon, for the rest of my life. Among peace officers, that's what's important. There is an appeals process for a revocation of that right. It's specified in the code. This is a token. It is an honorary thing that we give in respect to the service that they've given. As was pointed out, you can buy pieces of metal that look like a badge at any toy store. And so if there's a potential for abuse, the potential is there regardless of this bill. But the real authority that's given to a retired peace officer is that authority to carry a firearm. Far more, I think, likely if there's a small percentage where there might be abuse. And there is already in place a process for revocation and due process. I would go so far as to say also, though, this is a giving from the state or the government. There are Supreme Court cases that talk about due process and its requirement. We don't specify what that due process is. There are many areas where the due process is not spelled out. But it would begin with an appeal to the chief, and then there could be a civil suit that would be filed pursuant to a failure of the chief to give back the badge in that kind of circumstances. I think that suffices for this honorary recognition that we're giving.
Senator, is it not the case that there are already consequences if someone impersonates an officer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for pointing that out. That's also true, that if that kind of abuse would first and foremost go to a penal code section that would apply to anyone who would abuse those kinds of powers or inappropriately use those powers.
Mr. Hagman? There's a motion to move the bill and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, roll call vote.
Arambula?
Aye.
Arambula, aye. Hagman? Aye. Hagman, aye. Amiano? Amiano, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Ma, aye. Bill's out.
Very well. The bill is out. We now move to item 13, Senate Bill 434. Mr. Benoit.
Thank you, members. Senate Bill 434 deals with prisoners and cell phones in our state prisons. Currently, there is no specific penalty in place to pursue a prisoner or their criminal syndicate that might work to smuggle cell phones into prisons. In 2007, there were 1,400 cell phones confiscated from state prisoners, which doubled to 2,800 confiscated in 2008. But in January of 2009, 369 phones were confiscated, and at that rate, it could be expected that over 4,000 cell phones will be confiscated this year in our state prisons. I'm also proposing technical amendments to the bill which will conform the second provision of the bill to the first in relation to the individuals using or visiting in CDCR facilities. SB 434 has bipartisan support and has received unanimous support in the Senate, both in the Public Safety Committee and on the floor. We have a good deal of support. I just would briefly say that this issue came to my attention as a result of a prison visit I had in a state facility in Norco, California, wherein after the tour I met with the folks that handle the investigation of incidents involving crime and gang activity, and I asked if there was an issue that the legislature could deal with that would help them, what would it be? And 5 people in coveralls with guns and all sorts of stuff kind of yelled out in uniform, we need a law on cell phones. And we investigated and found out that while we have current statute that applies in local facilities, it does not apply in state prisons. My work in the Senate with my joint author, Senator Leno required that we move this from a felony to an extremely high misdemeanor and with a dollar penalty. It's a very serious offense that merits at least that kind of penalty, and I would ask for your support, and we have witnesses in support here.
Good morning. Again, Lieutenant Barbara Ferguson, San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. We're in support of this bill, and I'm here to testify about how well the current law does work for prohibiting the possession of a cell phone in a county jail facility. The incidence of cell phones in possession of inmates is very, very low in our county, so it's very effective. I think it's very important that the state prisons also have that ability to enforce, to confiscate, because so many crimes are committed as a result of inmates having cell phones in the prisons. They sell them. They make contact with the outside world. They can navigate a hit on somebody. It's very important that we have a law like this in place. Thank you.
Additional witnesses?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Matt Gray on behalf of Taxpayers for Improving Public Safety. In support, while we don't appreciate the creation of a new crime, we think that we have plenty of crimes on the books. This is a serious offense. We're concerned about the trafficking of illegal narcotics and gang activities inside our prison systems, which do not improve public safety and do not make for a constructive use of other inmates' time while in prison. We do recognize of the cell phones that have been collected inside our prison system, an overwhelming majority of them have not come through visiting. They have, in fact, come through staff transporting the materials inside the prisons, not in all cases, but in many cases. And we also, in reading the bill, we think that visiting, the term visiting, does not necessarily refer to the formal visiting process, but if a staff also visits an inmate in their cell to deliver the contraband, meaning the cell phone. So we're happy that it does cover all people equally, and we're happy to support this legislation. Thank you.
Very well. Any other witnesses in support? Any in opposition? Please come forward. No?
Move the bill.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Under discussion, Member Amiano.
Yes, thank you. I am struck by the irony of the lousy cell reception we have in this building, but I guess in prisons you can. Is that true? I mean, why couldn't we just block it or get a carrier that isn't worth anything? And I don't mean to be glib about this. I know it is serious, but I do have concerns about it.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your concerns, and I've asked those same questions. And in fact, there's efforts at the federal level to allow for a blocking technology. Frankly, the technology is not perfect, and there's concerns about overlap outside of the prison areas. Getting the federal authorities to allow any kind of blockage of signal is a huge constitutional and legal issue that has not been agreed to at this point. It may at the future do that, but there still will be technologies that need to be addressed and would be addressed by this bill, because the most effective of blockage systems are not 100% effective.
And then in terms of the confiscation, if I'm visiting someone and I forgot and have my cell phone on me, that will be confiscated and not returned?
I believe there would have to be some form of intent to carry it. Typically, though, it's very clear when you walk in the door, anybody walking into those prison facilities has to leave at the door, or better in the car, any kind of communication device. It's difficult to conceive of an inadvertent carrying of a cell phone into the prison for visiting purposes.
Occasionally distraction, but I understand what you're saying. You're not entering the Vatican, you're entering a prison, so you should be aware of what's going to happen once you cross the portal.
I think even in the Vatican, they ask you to turn it off.
Yeah. Well, they would. And then is there, the thing that disturbed me, it's a little tangential, is that it states that the current practices of security are not efficient enough to confiscate contraband such as this, and that bothers me a little bit. I mean, what is that really saying about the standards for security? It doesn't.
May I speak?
Sure.
Please.
It's a known fact that inmates will hide objects, especially as small as a cell phone, in their body cavities. And so those aren't readily discovered unless we are authorized to do a body cavity search.
Thank you, Mr. Amiano. Frankly, just to be very candid, there are materials that go into the prison which are unsearched, and largely, while the prison policy will say that all materials coming in and out will be searched, as common practice, which I personally observed at a number of institutions, the search occurs as the staff is exiting the institution. That doesn't mean in all cases, but for example, when I was with the legislature and I was going into institutions, they would not search my bag, my duffel bag. They would just tell me what's allowed and not allowed. That is a problem. We should not have any members of the state or any members of the general public going into an institution without having their bag searched.
And if I could make one further comment, one thing that was explained to me at the prison I was visiting is that we're not talking about the cell phone that you commonly think of and I do exclusively. We're also talking about components removed from this device, shipped in just the smallest circuit board necessary, and then wired into a television that's allowed in the cell and used by the prisoner then to make those calls. Or, in some cases, the chip that identifies the user here, and just with that one chip, which is also banned by this bill, there are passing of phones around and the chip is then utilized. It's very difficult to find those kinds of small items. I should also clarify that we have heard many stories about prisoners being supplied phones by employees of not only the Department of Corrections, but other contract services who drop a small lunch bag in a barrel containing a phone or a chip. It is very, very difficult to completely rid this item from the prison cells, and particularly when you find it, there's no teeth in what you can do to the person who has it.
And then, is the $5,000 fine, is it realistic to think that that'll ever get paid?
In some cases, no. In some cases, yes, and particularly I think it's a deterrent to those on the outside who might bring a phone in intentionally and try to supply the phone to an inmate. As I said earlier, I think it deserves a much stronger penalty. This is a reasonable minimum.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Member Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Isn't it true, Senator, that your bill does have a provision in it that requires in the receiving area or the visitor's receiving area that it be posted regarding cell phones, that they would be confiscated?
Yes, absolutely. And I believe that's current policy today, but this would add a penal code violation for those who fail to do so.
Very well. Any additional comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank the author. I think this is an excellent bill and very timely. Thank you.
And I thank you, and I would be willing to and appreciative of any additional co-authors who might wish to join.
Just a clarification, the motion would be to adopt as proposed to be amended in committee.
Yes, thank you.
With the changes that were made. Co-author requests, Member Gilmore, and I trust any other members that wish to do so will contact you directly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, there was a motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Arambula?
Aye.
Arambula, aye. Hagman? Amiano? Amiano not voting. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Ma? Ma, aye. Bill's out.
Thank you very much.
The bill is out. We'll keep the roll open for folks to add on. And I believe that concludes all of your bills, Senator.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much.
The other items, I think, were approved under the consent.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck in your committee hearing.
Thank you.
Senator Maldonado, you're presenting another bill had been approved on the consent calendar.
That is
We're
correct.
now hearing item 13, SB 434.
That would be SB 492, Mr. Chair.
492, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair and members, SB 492 so far has received unanimous support in the Senate. This bill is an important measure designed to help keep our kids safe at schools. No child should have to look out the window to see gang activity just on the other side of the fence. How can we expect our kids to learn with danger lurking just outside the school walls? SB 492 would strengthen penalties for gang members who are loitering around school grounds. It would provide that anyone previously convicted of gang offense who was convicted of loitering would be guilty of a misdemeanor punishable up to $1,000 fine or up to 1 year in prison. Mr. Chair, I'd also like to add that although the analysis does not include this bill has been supported by the district attorneys, the San Bernardino Sheriff Department, and Crimes Victim Alliance. I would ask for an aye vote, Mr. Chair.
And I do believe there was some late communication on this bill.
Not on this
1 second.
Not on this one, but that's okay.
We don't have that reflected in our record, Senator, but any witness, any additional comments or any witnesses in support? Any witnesses in opposition?
Good morning, Chair and members. I'm Robert Sanger. I'm the chair of the Legislative Committee of California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, and I'm here to speak in opposition to this bill. There are really 4 points that we feel need clarification and additional work and thinking as the bill stands presently. First of all, we believe that this bill is, while it's well-intentioned, and we agree that schools should be safe, this bill has the further effect of segregating people who are affiliated with gangs. There's not a requirement of a prior conviction here, just a prior registration. And rather than addressing gang issues in a way that is inclusive and corrective, it segregates people and actually puts them in the same category under the language of the statute as sex offenders. Secondly, we believe that existing law is adequate to the task. There are code sections that provide for punishments for loitering, for gang-related activities. Certainly, anybody who's on probation for a gang-related activity can have conditions imposed by that court placing them on probation. To the extent that this is in furtherance or increases penalties for loitering, it increases them incrementally. An extra $1,000 fine, 6 months is increased to a maximum of 1 year for the penalties, which we'll address here as point number 3. This is a situation that actually poses an additional threat to public safety in that we're increasing mandatory minimums, or at least the court should consider a minimum of 10 days on a second offense, a minimum of 90 days on a third offense. If the court's going to do that, that's fine, but all the jails in this state, including the jails in this area, we're talking about Salinas here and Santa Barbara County, those jails are vastly overcrowded. People are not being incarcerated for other crimes because there's not sufficient room in the jails. And fourthly, the language, I think, is unfortunate. In some places it's overbroad, talking about not allowing somebody to stand in a public place where children congregate. That could be somebody flying a kite. And the language actually doesn't accommodate the United States Supreme Court Papa Christou decision or the California Christopher S. decision, which requires an additional element to loitering. This states the elements of loitering which were previously found unconstitutional and were augmented by the court. Thank you.
Any additional witnesses in opposition? Any questions or comments by committee members? Member Amiano?
Yes, I definitely respect the intent of this law and the senator who has sponsored it, but I do echo the concerns of our last speaker. I think it, in San Francisco we have gang issues, we have loitering issues, the whole area, constitutional area of loitering, what is loitering, the gray areas that are there have really given us pause about what the overall picture is in gang prevention. I'm not necessarily supportive of gang injunctions, although we do have one in San Francisco. Sometimes you do want to accommodate because of the seriousness of the crimes, and obviously as someone who taught school for 25 years, I really want those neighborhoods to be safe, and I just feel that this is lobbing something that's really not going to help, and even though the intention is there, I also think that the net that it casts is too broad. One of the problems we identified, even with the gang injunction, is that people don't trust cops. I'm not putting that on the cops. I'm saying that's a situation that exists now, and I don't think that this really would help with that situation, because I think that there's a lot of personal discretion on the part of the police officer. It seems to me, the way it's written, you could even suspect that someone might have been registered and then cuff them. And then there's issues of people who strike, the unions, teachers, paraprofessionals. I think that they also could be victimized by an overzealous enforcement here. So I am not going to be supportive, and I don't mean that in any disrespect to the author, but this is just something I'm not supporting.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions by committee members? There's a motion for adoption. Is there a second? The chair will give a courtesy second. Under discussion, Senator, in our analysis, it indicates that current law already provides for criminal penalties for loitering around a school without a lawful purpose. What evidence is there that current laws are inadequate?
Well, first of all, Mr. Chair, I didn't go through my whole statement. I wanted to shorten it up. But the gang presence in schools is an increasing problem in my district, especially in Salinas, a city that happens to be just right outside my district, but board's right up to it, and I'm trying to do as much as I can to prevent what's been happening there. On January 12th, a 15-year-old Jose Lopez was shot in the torso near a soccer field at LSL High School in Salinas, and it was on Monday morning at 9 a.m. School was in session. Juan died of his injuries. Another LSL High School student was also killed that same week. In 3 days, 5 people were killed, and 23 of the 25 homicides in Salinas have all been gang-related. So I think this proves that what we have in place today could be strengthened just a little bit. This bill, Mr. Chair, does not create a new crime. It doesn't punish gang members who are trying to get their lives back together. This bill only targets those who are convicted of loitering and who have no legitimate reason to be near school grounds after they've been posted as a gang member under the current law of 5 years. After 5 years that you come off the gang list, if you loiter, then this bill does not pertain to you. This bill only pertains when you've been convicted, you're on the list, you're a gang member, and you're loitering after the principal has told you not to be here, and you still come back and you get convicted.
And current
and the
laws
sentence,
are,
Mr. Chair, of
not
jail.
adequate?
And the sentence of jail, as the gentleman talked on point number 2, obviously is at the discretion of the judge. It's not mandatory by the judge.
And in your view, the current penalties are inadequate for loitering?
I think this is an enhancement of a loitering law that we have in place for people who are on the gang list registration, who must be on there for 5 years after they've been convicted of gang activity.
Additional questions or comments? Yes, Member Gilmore.
Senator, I commend you for the bill, and I think we should be doing everything we can. In the Central Valley, gangs are a growing problem, and we should be doing everything that we can to protect the children at our school, and I commend you for the bill.
Thank you.
Okay. Very well. Member Ma.
Thank you very much, and I applaud the author for his efforts, and I think as a legislator, I have been very consistent in terms of sexual predators around the school and trying to be more tough on that. We had many issues when I was on the Board of Supervisors of people loitering and lurking around that were actual registered on the Megan's list. So This is obviously a big problem for you, Senator, and I will vote to support you on this, and hopefully it will prevent future incidences or tragedies in the future. So
thank you very much.
Very well. Any concluding comments, Senator?
No, Mr. Chair, I think just in closing, I think this is a minor step in the right direction to try to prevent more gang activity around schools, especially in Salinas, where we have a huge problem.
Very well. There was a motion and a courtesy second. Roll call vote.
Arambula?
Not voting.
Arambula not voting. Hagman? Amiano? Amiano, no. Furutani? Furutani not voting. Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Ma? Ma, aye. Bill's on call. It needs one.
The matter's on call. We'll keep the roll open. Thank you. And thank you for presenting, Senator. The next author, I believe, is Mr. Nava. If you'd come forward and present on item number 1, H.R. 16.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. This is H.R. 16, the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Resolution. Matthew Shepard was 5 feet 2 inches tall and he weighed 102 pounds. On October 6 of 1998, because he was gay, he was pistol whipped, tied to a fence for 18 hours in near freezing temperatures with only the constant Wyoming wind as his companion. His face was caked in blood, but for the trails of skin where his tears had washed that blood away. The police officer who found him said, "The only white skin I saw on his face was where he had been crying." Besides cuts and obvious blows to his face, he suffered a fracture from behind his head to just in front of his right ear. He suffered massive brain stem injury, that which controls your heartbeat, body temperature, and other involuntary functions. His injuries were too severe to operate. He later died. Statistics reported by the California Attorney General's office show that 18% of violent hate crimes committed in our state are related to sexual orientation or gender identity. On February 12th of 2008, there was a tragic killing of a 15-year-old boy in Oxnard, California. Lawrence King was shot to death in a computer lab. His killer, a young teen and classmate, who shot him when he learned that Lawrence wanted him to be his Valentine. This is an issue that demands our immediate attention. House Resolution 16 establishes California's support of the federal Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Act and asks both the United States Senate and the President to pass this important piece of legislation. The Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Act expands the federal hate crimes law to include crimes motivated by a victim's real or perceived gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. This act will authorize the U.S. Attorney General to provide technical, forensic, and prosecutorial assistance in the criminal investigation and prosecution of these crimes. The Act will also allow grants to state, local, or tribal programs designed to combat hate crimes committed by juveniles. The Act is named after Matthew Shepard, the young man who was beaten, left for dead, and died. His attackers singled him out because of his sexual orientation. The brutal crime was not prosecuted as a hate crime because the state of Wyoming does not list this type of discrimination under their hate crimes law. California has already added gender identity and sexual orientation to our list of hate crimes, but in states like Wyoming, there is no just prosecution for these crimes. The Act will update and expand federal hate crimes law so that they will be fully investigated and prosecuted. This resolution is sponsored by Equality California. We have witnesses here to speak in support. We ask for an aye vote.
Prior to going to the witnesses, just for the record, there are some proposed amendments that go to who would receive transmittal of copies of the resolution, if I understand correctly. And at the appropriate time, those will be included in any motions.
Thank you. Yes.
Witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Alice Kessler with Equality California. We're the sponsor of the bill. We've come really far in California, obviously. We're one of the few states that protects against crimes based on gender identity. We're one of 32 states where sexual orientation is included, but as the author said, there's still 18 states in the country that don't provide any protection on these bases. And frankly, even here in California, we've seen in recent years a number of hate crimes targeting lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Gwen Araujo, Larry King, Satinder Singh right here in Sacramento. So it's something we have to continuously work on. And this federal legislation is long overdue. It will allow the FBI to go in and prosecute and investigate hate crimes in states and local jurisdictions that cannot or will not do so. So we would ask that this committee support the resolution and ask for your aye vote.
Additional testimony.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Derek Lawson, and I'm here today representing the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community. I'm President Emeritus of the Sacramento Stonewall Club, a member of the Satinder Justice Coalition, formed in response to the tragic death of a young South Asian man from Fiji who was the victim of a hate crime based on his ethnicity and perceived sexual orientation. And I'm a commissioner of the Sacramento Regional Human Rights and Fair Housing Commission. And I'm here today because I am a survivor of hate crime. The question I pose is simple. Am I, as an openly gay man, safe? In the late 90s, I was in a known gay part of town in the Central Valley of California, and while approaching my car, I was struck from behind, knocked to the ground, and then others joined my assailant. I have no idea how many of them there were. There were more than 2, but maybe as many as 5. I was hit and kicked repeatedly. I still have today a dent in my rib cage where I suffered 4 broken ribs. It is impossible for me to describe to you how that made me feel, not just on a physical level. It absolutely hurt, but on the mental and emotional turmoil that day caused me. I made it to my car, I made it to my house, and I made it into the tub and then called a church elder who came and took me to the emergency room. I was in the closet at the time, and no one knew I was gay, not my dad, who pastored a large church in town, not my business partners, and none of my friends. So how was I to explain this? You want to talk about fear. Here I was the victim, yet all I could think of was how if anybody found out I was gay, I would lose everything. My business, my family, and my friends. And there were perpetrators out there who knew my secret, but there was no way I could try and hold them accountable, force an investigation, or face my assailants. Not long after that, I moved to Sacramento, where I heard I could be safe. I started a new practice as a chiropractor, and for a while I felt safe. The gay community was active, visible, and considered an attribute to the greater fabric of Sacramento. I became involved in the community. Through the relationships we built, I continue to feel not only safe, but excited about the difference that I was making in my community. And then that all changed over 3 years ago. The events of the LGBT community began to be picketed by homophobic members of the evangelical and Slavic communities. From Queer Youth Lobby Day to our Pride celebrations, the protests became more and more aggressive, and we no longer felt safe. Our events took on a new appearance, and thankfully our law enforcement responded to our needs and created a very highly visible presence at each event. They provided police escorts for our youth as they came to the lobby at the Capitol. Law enforcement appeared en masse at school board meetings, film festivals, and Pride's events. Did we feel safe? Well, we were certainly glad they were there because, frankly, we did not feel safe. Yet we were under the illusion that we were creating safety for our community again. And then our worst fears were realized when Satinder Singh was punched at Lake Natoma on July 1st, 2007. He subsequently died 4 days later. His death has changed my life forever. But joining with our straight allies, we created the Satinder Justice Coalition. And yet the protests continue. One of their tactics has been to shout out the first and last names of members of our community at our events, followed by our home addresses. This happened to me each time at every event for many years, and I thought it was just a means of intimidation. Unfortunately, I was wrong and underestimated them. Just last year, my partner and I had protesters at our private residence. Once again, imagine how unsafe I felt. There had been a death already, and we know that hate speech leads to hate crimes. I've been told that this year already in Sacramento, 6 hate crimes have been committed, and 4 of them were reported to be homophobically based. Being here today puts me personally at risk again. Each time I speak out for my community, I understand that there may be consequences. On the one hand, those consequences could be personal harm. But on the other hand, my testimony may have the consequence of making a difference in providing safety for those who cannot provide it for themselves. So I want you to know why I'm here today. When Satinder Singh was killed, I had to ask myself, as a leader in this community, had I done all I could do to prevent his death? And to be honest, I will never know the answer to that question. But that's what haunts me and pushes me to go on doing all I can and am asked to do to make this community safe again. I moved here to escape a place that made me afraid, and I ask you, where do I go from here? There are 18 states which do not have protections against hate crimes that I am privileged to be protected by here in California. So I ask you to take a stand with me in support of H.R. 16 and send a message to our national government, which has no protection for gay people in the gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender communities, to pass and sign into law the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your courage and your eloquence.
Thank you. Dawn Kepke with McHugh & Associates on behalf of Crime Victims United of California in strong support. We know that based on the Attorney General's data is that hate crimes seem to be on the rise, which is unacceptable. We urge this committee to pass this resolution and urge the federal government to do the same. Hate crimes is not acceptable in any form. Thank you.
Motion made and seconded. Any additional witnesses in support? Any in opposition? Concluding comments, Member Nava.
Yes, in that there are amendments before this committee that we're going to accept, it is an opportunity for members to sign on as co-authors should they choose, and I'm perfectly, Ms. Ma has indicated, Mr. Amiano, Mr. Furutani, over on, okay.
The chair as well.
All right, and the chair, thank you.
Any questions or comments by members of the committee? Member Amiano.
Yeah, I do want to applaud the author for bringing this forward. Obviously, he and all of us stand on many people's shoulders around this issue. It's been long overdue. And of course, the personal histories are always extremely compelling. They're provocative to me as a gay man because I did go through, I used to joke and say I found a different way to school every day. You live with this oppression for a long time and there's no place to go. And now we do have a place to go. And I also want to complement the education that's taken place, you know, with our law enforcement. There was a time in San Francisco where if you were beaten up, you would be arrested. The gay guy would be arrested, or the lesbian would be arrested. And so we've come a long way. And I know there was a legislator in the South who called the Matthew Shepard's incident a hoax. I can't imagine any bigger moral bankruptcy than to stigmatize that tragedy with a petty and shallow assessment. So we still have our work to do. I think that when we talk about issues like that, it says something about ourselves, and I think that the denial and the distance becomes comfortable. But you know, we have to push the envelope on these issues. It's not about a comfort level. It's really about justice and discrimination, and in this case, you know, murder and maiming and general mayhem. And it doesn't have to be exaggerated. It's all been documented. So it's my honor to co-sponsor this.
Additional comments or questions? If not, there is a motion and a second to approve as proposed to be amended in committee. Roll call vote.
Arambula?
Aye.
Arambula, aye. Hagman? Almiano? Almiano, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Gilmore? Gilmore not voting. Hill? Ma? Ma, aye.
The bill is out. We'll keep the roll open for folks to add on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
We now turn to, I believe, Senator Cedillo was next with item number 10, which is SB. I need new glasses, Senator.
SB 324. Ready?
Welcome. And please, when you're prepared, please feel free to present on your bill.
Well, members, thank you for this opportunity. This bill, by comparison to what you've heard this morning, is very modest, but nonetheless very significant and brilliant in its simplicity, in that it provides an opportunity for us to take something that's bad and turn it into something that's good. Confiscated goods are a major problem to our economy. In LA County, the estimates are $2 billion of confiscated goods each year that's problematic for us, particularly during these difficult economic times. On the other hand, with this law, we will be able to take that and use that to provide clothing, shoes for people who are in tremendous need. As you know, our homeless population continues to grow. It's quite significant, and this will help people who are in great need by this modest change in the law, which, with the permission of those manufacturers, will permit confiscating entities to turn over those goods to homeless shelters and ensure that poor people have the dignity of clothing and shelter. It's a very, very modest bill, but nonetheless very significant to those in great need, and as I began, turn something bad into something good.
And you've done an excellent job at working with the interested parties to make sure there's no opposition, as I understand.
Yes, correct.
Witnesses in support.
Christine Menahan, Western Center on Law and Poverty, and also on behalf of Shelter Partnership, who brought the legislation to Senator Cedillo. I don't have a great deal to add because it is a simple, ingenious way of delivering clothing and shoes, and primarily to people that are in homeless shelters. We know that homelessness is burgeoning as we have the tremendous increase in job loss and foreclosures, and so we're looking at shelters that are attempting to provide minimal benefits, and this will increase what goods they're able to distribute people who find themselves in this kind of situation. We urge an aye vote, please.
Thank you. Other witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Matt Gray on behalf of taxpayers for improving public safety. We appreciate simple brilliance. It's something that is long overdue. I'll leave it there. This is not, the face of the homeless population is indeed changing. We're talking about people also who may lose entire neighborhoods to fire, in addition to the jobless situation and the other faces of homelessness. And we think this is a long overdue piece of legislation, which is very modest and well received. Thank you. We ask for your support.
Any additional witnesses in support or in opposition? Hearing and seeing none. Committee members, questions or comments? If not, then the chair would entertain a motion for approval. Chair will second the motion. Roll call vote.
Arambula?
Aye.
Arambula, aye. Hagman? Amiano? Amiano, aye. Furutani? Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill? Ma? Bill's on call.
Matters on call. Thank you, Senator.
Chair, thank you, and thank you, members.
Chair would like to recognize Senator Padilla. You'll be presenting, I understand, on item 15, Senate Bill 449. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. While this may not be simple brilliance, I do believe it's common sense nonetheless, and present this on behalf of the Attorney General. SB 449 is intended to improve the reporting of firearm acquisitions by secondhand dealers and pawnbrokers by requiring such transactions to be electronically reported to the Department of Justice. I want to recognize that there's a proposed amendment attached to the committee analysis that would satisfy issues and concerns of double reporting, cross-referencing, and timely access to the reports that may be posed by the bill in its current form. So I'd appreciate your favorable consideration, not just of the bill before you, but the amendments presented as well. With those amendments, this bill would do a couple of things. Specifically, it would provide a sunset of June 30th, 2009 to current law requiring secondhand dealers to report firearm acquisitions to local law enforcement. We're substituting that reporting to local law enforcement, which then in turn has to input into the statewide database with the direct reporting to the Department of Justice. And once inputted to the statewide database there, it's accessible to all law enforcement agencies throughout the state. Second, it would require that secondhand dealers in a format prescribed by the Department of Justice and on the day of the transaction report this information electronically. So it is immediate and helps us maintain the database as accurately as possible, and that goes into effect July 1st of 2010. Third, it authorizes the Department of Justice to retain secondhand dealer reports for the purposes of determining whether firearms have been reported lost or stolen. And finally, the bill would provide that all information reported by secondhand dealers shall be electronically provided by the Department of Justice to the secure mailbox of the local law enforcement agencies within the jurisdiction where secondhand dealers are located within 1 working day of receipt by the Department of Justice. Again, just maximizing the timeliness and the effectiveness and the efficiency of this process and of this database. And with that, I would ask for your aye vote.
I do commend you for your modifications to the reporting requirements that meet the needs of local law enforcement. Any witnesses in support or in opposition? Comments from or questions from committee members?
Thank you, Senator. I'm curious. I'm very supportive of this. The electronic transmission that happened when it had to go through the local officials first, I confess ignorance on this. Pawnbrokers and secondhand dealers. That would be through the internet, through computers, and do they have access to that? Has there ever been a problem with the way it's transmitted?
The infrastructure is there.
It's all there.
Language is in the bill to make sure that it's done on a secure basis as well.
Okay. Thanks.
Very well. Additional questions or comments? Hearing and seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to approve as proposed to be amended in committee. Motion made by Mr. Amiano, seconded by the chair, or Mr. Gilmore. And roll call vote.
Arambula?
Aye.
Arambula, aye. Hagman? Amiano? Aye. Amiano, aye. Furutani? Gilmore? Aye. Gilmore, aye. Hill? Ma.
The matter's on call, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I understand that we have one remaining item, and if Senator Oropesa's office is listening, this is the time to please have the senator come down and present on the one remaining bill on the committee's agenda for today. That would be item number 3, SB 18. Just an announcement, because of an unavoidable conflict, Senator Oropesa will not be able to present her bill today. We will be carrying this bill over to our next meeting. With that, why don't we lift some calls, Madam Secretary? Senator Cedillo's bill, SB 324, item number 10. Let's call the absentees.
Hagman. Hagman, aye. Furutani, Hill, Mott. That bill's out.
That bill is out. We turn to item number 15, SB 449, Senator Padilla. Call the absent members.
Hagman. Aye. Hagman, aye. Furutani, Hill, Mott. That bill is also out.
That bill is also out. We turn to item 17, Senator Maldonado, SB 492. Absent members?
Hagman? Aye. Hagman, aye. That bill is out.
That bill is also out. Very well, and we will be... With that, we have concluded the business of the committee for the day. For members who wish to add on, will be available for the next 5 minutes for members to do so. With that, thank you all for making this a pleasant first meeting, and meeting adjourned.